Dub Lab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis LA and Dub Lab. Hosted by Paul Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello?
Hello, could I please speak with Anthony Romero?
Hello, Paul. I recognize that voice. How are you?
I am very well, and I'm so pleased, Anthony, that you're taking the time to be part of the Quarantine Tapes.
Oh, I'm delighted. How did I turn you down? How are you doing, my boy? How are you doing?
All things considered, or maybe not considering everything, I'm doing all right. I've been very diligent with these quarantine tapes. We've done nearly 100. It's quite extraordinary.
I know. You're quite the stamina. I listened to a couple of them, but I have not heard all of 100. But they're remarkable.
I'm
some of my favorite people that you've had on the show.
Tell me who
like Anand. Anand I thought was great, and Susan.
Right.
I thought she was remarkable. Larry Wilkinson, remarkable, but it was good to hear your voice. You leave New York, and then we get a pandemic, and the whole city is really changed. I don't know. Your departure was almost as frightful. I'm cheeky, but I think I miss having you in New York at the New York Public Library. You were quite an institution of itself, and the conversations you held there were just remarkable and world-class.
Well, thank you very, very much, Anthony. I should say that I am speaking with Anthony Romero, who is the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. And I won't ask you the question I ask everybody, which is, what have you been up to over the last 4 months? Because what haven't you been up to? I mean, 140 and some lawsuits in the works now that the ACLU is pursuing. And I'd like to bring one to the foreground now, because it's so recent and it's so important. Just last week, Anthony, the ACLU filed a lawsuit against the Department of Homeland Security after they deployed agents against protesters in Portland. Now, what are the legal implications of such a case?
Well, for us, I mean, this goes right to the heart of what the ACLU was really founded almost over 100 years ago now, Paul.
Yes.
To defend the right of individuals to speak their minds and to protest and to assemble freely. I mean, that's the very roots of our organization, founded in the aftermath of the Palmer raid. We had a xenophobic, racist president, Woodrow Wilson at the time, who deployed the full fury of the Justice Department on immigrants, on people who protested the government. It was the aftermath of the First World War, a very unpopular war. And the government was hell-bent to shut down those who disagreed and dissented with it. And so here we are 100 years later, watching the events in Portland. I'm even more surprised that this is playing out with the details in Portland that we're now seeing. The idea that we have federal agents who are in combat fatigues and without any insignia or identification of what agency they work for, and whisking away protesters in unmarked vehicles to deliver them to federal courthouses, that when they then read them the Miranda rights and the individuals then request to talk with a lawyer is when they're released. It's Kafkaesque, Paul. If you had asked me years ago, would this be possible, that you would have military forces deployed on the streets of America, to say we saw in Lafayette Park, where we're also suing the Department of Homeland Security for how they used the excessive force against the protesters so that President Trump could have a photo op with a Bible in front of a church. I guess the only way that you can get that type of photograph is when you actually clear people away and construct it. But the idea that we have these forces and these individuals who are being deployed on protesters and for individuals who are basically speaking out against the government. And today, the president on Twitter saying that he would do the same in other cities, whether it's Chicago or elsewhere, unless order were established.
Right. He said, I'll send more federal law enforcement wherever they're needed.
Yeah, well, they're not needed in this way, and that's for sure. And I think what is most eerie about this thing, Paul, that keeps me up at night, although there's much that keeps me up at night, is the idea. I wonder if this is a trial run, right? If these are federal forces that are under the kind of the command and control of the President of the United States to stymie and shut down debate in cities where they're not welcome and not asked but not needed. I mean, the governor of Oregon has been pretty clear that they're not being helpful. The mayor of Portland has been very clear. And yet here you have the president inserting himself in local politics and local dynamics and local law enforcement in a way that just fully exacerbates the already the lack of trust that exists between law enforcement and communities. So this feels like a powder keg that is just we're packing it with more gunpowder, and who knows how it will blow. We're very concerned. And obviously the legal issues in the case in Portland are very straightforward. You have the right to protest. You have the right to assemble. Even in a quarantine, even with stay-at-home orders, there are ways for individuals to express themselves, and they run the risk of being arrested in some cases if they break the rules of what the stay-at-home orders require. But still, the idea that you use these very heavy tactics to shut down protesters. If you had told me, Paul, that this would play out in some of the large American cities, if you said this to me 4 or 5 years ago, or 6 years ago, before this president, I would have said that's impossible in America. In America, we have rule of law, we have established norms. You will never have federal forces without identification or insignias, whisking people away in unmarked cars. That's the type of things you've heard in totalitarian regimes in countries that we often decry and criticize. It can never happen in the United States of America. And yet here we are, litigating over these facts.
So
really quite a startling moment.
You said it's a dry run, and I'm wondering, a dry run for what? And then added to that, and a dry run for what? You said it's a dry run.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, what is it a dry run for?
Right, it's funny. Go ahead, please.
No,
please.
And the second comment is, Anthony, you said if I had asked you 4 years ago or 5 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago, but do you think that you were just simply naive?
I don't know. Perhaps I think I'm naive. I don't like to think of myself as naive.
I don't see you
idealistic
either.
or optimistic. Or I actually believe in these values. I mean, maybe that's what that's why I can certainly be faulted. I just never thought that some of the things that we are now witnessing and confronting and decrying and fighting were ever up for grabs. But this is just a very different environment than the one that I ever imagined the state of American democracy to be in. So a dry run. I try to be one of these clear-eyed progressives where I don't try to kind of worry about things that seem impossible. And so a lot of my counterparts and a lot of my members, I have many members across the country who are very worried about the country, say, do you think that Donald Trump, if he loses the election, actually won't leave? Nah, we have that norm, at least, is pretty well established. If he loses the election, he'll have to go. But as you begin to think about the idea that the president, who will the president call upon to defend himself? He doesn't have a local police force, right? That's what the mayors have, that they have the command and control power over police departments. The Army, I hope, has learned a lesson that it should stay out of politics, at least most recently with the Lafayette Park incident. It seems they've had to kind of learn their lane once again. But this idea that there are federal law enforcement agents who the president is deploying almost as his personal police force,
right, as
keepers of law and order at the behest of the president, and they're unidentified and unmarked and in unmarked vehicles, really sends a chill up my spine. So I begin to think that perhaps my members and my kind of wild-eyed progressives who have been given conspiracy theories, maybe they have something at it. And the idea that the president could actually insert himself in city and state law enforcement efforts when the federal government is not invited or requested is really problematic. And then the idea that he's doing it in cities like pledging at least to do it in cities like Detroit and Chicago and Portland, possibly Seattle, maybe San Francisco. I mean, these are all the big kind of liberal cities with large minority populations, people of color in those communities, and they begin to see the inhabitants of those cities as the enemy. It's a very dangerous moment. But I feel like we're living on the countdown, 4 months and counting, and then we'll see just how dangerous this moment really was or is.
I mean, I agree. I agree with you. I mean, I'm stunned. Stunned that I thought there was such a thing, even though I don't really understand the terms. I thought there was such a thing as checks and balances. But I see now. You recently said the more I've read about the last couple of weeks about where this country is, the more I'm clear that defund the police is my North Star. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
It's just not working, what we've been doing. We've been doing a lot for a long time. Our very first report on law enforcement was in 1931. So we got behind this report on lawlessness in law enforcement. We brought the big cases. Miranda, the right to remain silent was our case. Gideon, the right to a court-appointed attorney. Escobar, to be free from a coerced confession. You know, we're the ones who sued Mayor Bloomberg over stop and frisk. You know, it took him many years and a remarkable loss in federal courts, and he wouldn't apologize then. But now, recently he apologized. So we've been working on police reform and police accountability for literally decades. And while it certainly improved at some level, it has not worked. It has not worked. We cannot keep pretending that another lawsuit on patterns and practice of a corrupt police department or another training program implicit or explicit bias is going to work. You know, many of the, I'm stunned because you know this about me, Paul. I was trained in international affairs before I became a domestic civil rights guy and civil liberties guy. And so in my work in my studies around Latin America, we would often talk about civilian control of military and police. That there was an important check and balance that needs to be put in Latin American countries on the transition to democracy. And that's what we need here, frankly. You know, it's just like we need to lessen the Latin American transition. So we need to have greater civilian control over police. And the only way to exert the control is to shrink the financing and the budget. And the more I read about how some of these negotiations are completely tied, money and oversight are completely tied with one another. As the police departments will negotiate for a little less money if they get a lot more independence and a lot more control. Even in Milwaukee, I was stunned to read this. The right where all of this is playing out in real time. You know, there was this kind of very difficult union contract negotiation between the police department, the city, and the police union, which was, I think, the Minneapolis Police Federation. And it was completely a quid pro quo that they would give up a little bit on their financial demands if they had greater discretion and greater control over the police forces and the training of the police forces. And this great mayor who's been out there on TV, Jacob Fry, has been talking about the importance of limiting police abuse and brutality. He was overridden by the local police union when he banned the police officers from attending warrior training in Minneapolis. The police department just reversed them and had the power to reverse them.
Incredible.
So you do that, turn the tables on all this. I mean, we have to make sure that the police departments report to and into and are controlled by the elected officials. And the best way to do that is to right-size these budgets. I was reading some of these reports about how Defense Department surplus, this is why these police departments look like standing armies, that Defense Department surplus are granted under this one Department of Defense program, 1033, directly to police forces. That's why you have these armored vehicles and these military equipment that look like they're military. They don't look like
they do. And they're scary in the same way. And I keep thinking, when you think about defund the police, don't you also have to think immediately about defund the military?
Yeah, it's connected. It is definitely connected. It goes back to that lesson I learned in my Latin American studies classes. Exerting civilian control of military and police. I mean, it is so essential that we right size the conversation. And when you look at how much we've been spending on police departments, I was stunned.
No, I'm stunned.
Like Oakland,
I'm
almost
stunned.
40% of their budget is spent on police department expenditures. There's a great report for your listeners by the Center for Popular Democracy. They have a whole report, a wonky report with all the numbers and stats and statistics, per capita spending by city, looking at the different history. And there's one great author. So I know you're an intellectual. The one great author, if you're going to read one thing on this issue, I would read Alex Vitale, Vitale. He's a professor in New York, I think at Fordham, and he's written some wonderful books. There's an interview with him in The Intercept that is really quite good. Those are some of the leading thinkers on connecting financing with control over the police departments, because we cannot keep pretending that the same type of litigation or advocacy or training program is going to work. You know, the definition of insanity is you keep doing the same thing and you keep expecting a different outcome. So I wish not to be insane anymore on police reform. And I think it's really important that we took our cue from the Black-led groups, especially Black Lives Matter, and said, we want to push this as the lever of change. And I thought it was very important for the ACLU to be in strong solidarity with the leadership of Black Lives Matter, with the other organizations, that we will take our cue from them. And then we have much to add, because we have boots on the ground in every state. This is a hardcore political battle. Money is about power and politics. And you're not going to defund these police departments without the fight of our lives. And so we need to democratize the appropriations processes. We need to make sure that citizens come to hearings and town halls where budgets are discussed, appropriations are discussed, and then when the money is saved from police departments, you immediately reinvest them. It's much about reinvestment and divestment from police, and reinvestment in schools, in drug rehab programs, and training programs, and education and employment programs.
Anthony, I had Suketu Mehta on the program, and he said, let's not only think about defund the police, but refund them. Refund them in a way that makes sense. I mean, these 22, 23-year-old kids can't deal with marital problems with guns. But your first day at the ACLU was just about when September 11th happened. Are there lessons from 9/11 and its aftermath that can be applied, do you think, to this new moment of fear and emergency?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think one of the things I learned early on, I've been there 19 years, like you said, I started the week before 9/11, that in moments of crisis is when ideologues seize the crisis to push through a political agenda.
No kidding.
That was the lesson of the 9/11 moment, and we're still living with the consequences and the restrictions on liberty. Remember, the Patriot Act was enacted. I'm still litigating on some aspects of the Patriot Act, which is still good law in many respects. Guantanamo is still open. We have the military commissions that are there. So we need to be very mindful that in this moment of pandemic, in this moment of Trump presidency, in this moment of great fear and insecurity, that we not put in place government powers that we'll come to regret and that have a much longer life beyond the current crisis, the current moment.
Right.
And being inherently skeptical of anything that's said is utterly necessary or must do. So let's make sure we unpack that before we do it, to understand it fully. And I think a lot of what we're trying to do right now is to kind of make sure that there's a proper check on government overreach. And look, you have a federal government with Donald Trump that's on steroids in terms of the type of overreach that they're endeavoring. And part of the concern that we have is to make sure that the federal government remains as much under the control of kind of a system of checks and balances. It's been hard. I mean, we watch what's been playing out in the immigration context and in all these other contexts. And this administration has gotten away with a lot of policies over time that I would have been hard-pressed to imagine. And yet, I think the really important part is to make sure that we continue to contest it and never just accept it.
Because in a way, maybe Trump alone is not the issue. You mentioned Guantanamo, and 2 years ago you said that probably the most contentious meeting I've ever had, you said, was with President Obama. What was the nature of that meeting, and what made it so contentious?
Well, he was unhappy with me. I was invited to the White House, and I thought, I was pleased and proud to be at the White House with a relatively new President Obama, who was inviting us in. Little did I know that the reason why I was invited in was actually not to be not to take a photograph on the White House lawn, but actually to be dressed down for my criticism of the president around Guantanamo, and then subsequently with the warrantless wiretapping program that was unveiled by Edward Snowden, where you and I left off with Ed Snowden, who became our client.
That's right.
And I think President Obama was very unhappy with the ACLU, was critical of his unwillingness to push the envelope as aggressively as he needed to. And a lot of the challenges we're now confronting, especially with the kind of this very strong kind of exertion of White House power, the whole trajectory began under George Bush and deepened under President Obama, and no one really wanted to challenge the power of the White House to act unilaterally. And when I criticized the president for not shutting down Guantanamo or allowing for the drone attack that we thought were extrajudicial killings of individuals that were killed, one of them even an American citizen, without jury or without trial, and we contested that with President Obama. Much of these powers are the powers that then Donald Trump inherited.
Right.
Is an executive branch that was accustomed to working with very little criticism, and now Donald Trump took it to a whole other level, obviously. But it's certainly in the immigration context, it's much of this rolled into from one to another. And my criticism of President Obama was he said, it's not. He called me on the carpet and said that my criticism in comparison to his predecessor were simply not helpful, to which I had the retort that as long as the policies remained in place, the criticisms and the comparisons were fair and accurate, and they would continue from our corner. And I think one thing that's important for the ACLU is never to be in bed with any political party,
right,
or any political leader. We have to contest even the most popular president. And so I'm proud that of that one conversation I had with President Obama in the cabinet room, even though it was difficult and challenging, I'm proud that we stood up and asked the hard questions. I'm proud that the ACLU, although I was not around for it, so I can take no credit for it, but it was the only organization to have the courage to stand up to FDR during the internment of Japanese Americans, another popular president during wartime. And we look back on that as one of our finest moments, that we had the courage of our convictions to challenge the internment of Japanese Americans through a Supreme Court case that we brought on behalf of Fred Korematsu. So I think our job is to ask the tough questions and to hold government's feet to the fire and know that we will be here. What I tell my folks, sometimes we get very dispirited, Paul, is that no matter what, we will outlast this president. We will outlast Donald Trump. We'll see him when he actually ends up exiting the Oval Office. And we'll be here for the next one who walks in and tries to assert similar executive branch powers. But this one is unique. This one is more of a full court press than I would have ever imagined. We have over almost 400 lawsuits now that we've brought against the Trump administration on a whole broad range of issues, from LGBT rights.
Amazing.
To immigrants' rights.
Yeah.
So we're making sure that all of this be hotly contested. It matters too much. to just give it up without a fight.
I take it you haven't been invited to the White House under Trump.
I have. I've been with, not in recent history, not in recent months, but I developed a bit of a rapport with Jared Kushner. We agree on things like criminal justice. I believe it's important to, he's the senior advisor to the President of the United States, probably the second most powerful man in the country. I've not met President Trump, but I've worked with Jared Kushner on a couple of things, and there are many things on which we have disagreed. I figure my job is, if I am asked to provide insight and advice, then I provide it. And I also think that if people call and ask me for my opinion, I deserve to give them, the benefit of the doubt to give them my opinion. And a lot of what I talked with Jared Kushner and was off the record on different issues, so I can't say too much. Although I must say that I always felt like if any of my conversations were being recorded, I would feel fine if they were released, because I feel I just tell the truth and shame the devil. So that's what you have to do. But at the same time, I think there were places where Kushner was able to really move an agenda forward, especially on the first step back on criminal justice reform. And so I think the important part is to make a difference for the issues and the values that we care on.
In closing, Anthony, very, very sadly, earlier this year you received the Woodrow Wilson Award at Princeton University, where we both were students. How do you think his legacy should be handled? And in a way, fitting into all of this is Wilson was involved with the Palmer raids, which helped catalyze in a way the formation of the ACLU, and the very school that gave you that award now has a different name. So I'm just wondering if you can bring all of this together.
I think it's great that Princeton decided to retire the name of Woodrow Wilson from the school. We have to make decisions about the future, not about the past. And I'm sure that the trustees of Princeton have heard from a lot of the older alums who were aghast that they dared to rename the school or residential college that was named after a U.S. president. But I think we need to kind of take very seriously what type of message we send to the future leaders. And the students of Princeton are what Princeton is. Princeton is nothing but a cluster of Gothic, beautiful buildings that really nothing much to write home about, built in the 20th century, most of them, not even that old. But what makes Princeton so unique is the students, and it's the association with a president of the United States was either as problematic for the students and makes the place feel as unwelcome as it does. They also have changed the name. So I was delighted that they changed the name. I also accepted the award with glee because I thought there was a little bit of delicious irony. The idea that you had a gay Puerto Rican man, head of the organization, who was accepting the award named after the president who actually gave birth to my organization in revolt to his actions and policies. It was almost like a written for TV movie. It had kind of a delicious twist at the end of it. Yeah. But I think Princeton did the right thing by renaming it. And it's the same thing with these monuments that now we need that people are contesting. I mean, I don't know why we have such a hard time taking down these monuments to Confederate leaders and Confederate soldiers. I mean, it's just like, I don't know of any other country in the world that I've traveled to that has monuments to individuals who stood up for slavery. I have yet to see one in another country. Here's a monument to a slave owner because of his ideology. And then the idea that these were also individuals who led this country to this kind of abysmal civil war that cost so much life. So what was at play was whether or not America would undo its original sin of chattel slavery. And they lost. I mean, when have we ever built a monument to losers who bring us literally to the brink of war, who stand up for this anachronistic and anti-human humanist institution of slavery? So I don't understand what all this hoopla was about. And frankly, I think the more we move to the future and focus less on some of the injustices of the past, the better the future will be. And that's how I think we'll remember, this moment with this president. We'll step out of. I have to believe that the America that comes out of the COVID pandemic and the Donald Trump administration has got to be a country that is fairer and kinder and more progressive and more thoughtful, and where the playing field is more level and people are given a real chance. I have to believe that we come out of this crucible a better society.
Anthony,
and maybe that will be naive.
Anthony,
but it's the only way to live.
Anthony, it's been such a pleasure to speak with you. I could continue for so much longer, and we will have that pleasure at some point soon. And I hope your parting words really hold true. I too, even though I'm a skeptical optimist, I still remain so. And I thank you so much. So very, very much. Take care of yourself. Stay safe.
Okay, I can't wait to see you. I can't wait to lay eyes on you, Paul. Take good care, okay?
You do too.
All
the best to you.
You're okay. All the best. Okay, dear boy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.